Howdy. I've spent the last few years really trying to avoid recording anything political to post online. I know I've definitely made the random Facebook post, the random tweet, different ways to engage, but even then it's pretty sporadic. There's definitely some moments here and there. And it is odd when to choose to get involved. I think my overall opinion is that there's already a lot of noise out there, and we're already having so much conflict, and it's just really not healthy for any of us to be spending too much time on social media and debating and doing all of these things there. It's often not productive, and it may very well be an intentional distraction of sorts. But there's something that's been popping up more and more recently. I'm sure you've seen it in the news, read many Facebook posts or announcements from police departments in towns. And that is, of course, the topic of automated license plate readers, and more specifically, the Flock brand. They're not the only one, but they're the ones getting the most hate and most support out in the news right now. So let's just take a moment to talk about that. People keep on calling Flock cameras license plate readers, and that description is unfortunately wildly misleading, because the real issue is not that a camera can see your license plate. The issue is what happens after it sees you. Flock, and many of these others, but Flock specifically, creates a searchable time-stamped history of where vehicles, and therefore people like you and I, where we go. One picture of my truck driving down through town, it's not really going to tell you anything. It's not going to tell the sheriff, the local PD much. I've not stolen it. Maybe if someone stole it, hey, we'd be able to figure out where they go. But let's just say it's my normal day-to-day and my truck's not been stolen. That's not going to tell you much. But you collect those sightings for weeks. Now you can figure out where I live, where I work, what doctor I visit, what church I attend, what political events I go to, who I visit regularly, when I leave home, when I come back. And that is fundamentally different from simply being seen in public. There's a difference between someone seeing you drive down Main Street and then the government being able to type your information into a computer and reconstruct your movements after the fact. And that's just the first problem. The second is even bigger. Normally, surveillance is supposed to work something like this. Police have a reason to suspect you of something. Then they investigate you. Flock, though, flips that completely around. They're out there collecting everyone's movements first. Then they store them and decide later who they're interested in. You don't enter the system because you're suspected of committing a crime. You enter it because you just drove down the road. And the innocent aren't accidentally swept into the database. The innocent are most of the database. And that's where people usually say, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, what do you have to worry about? Well, a lot, actually, because you don't have to do anything wrong. You only need the system to be wrong or the system to be abused. We've already seen innocent people falsely associated with stolen vehicles, and not even sometimes actually stolen vehicles, just a bad plate read. We have people detained, people confronted by armed officers, people accused of crimes they didn't commit. We also see allegations of officers using Flock systems to locate people for personal reasons, often stalking enemies and exes. So no, this is not some hypothetical argument about what might happen 30 years from now, 5 years from now, a year from now. A lot of people call you conspiracy theorists or tinfoil hat wearers. No, mistakes and abuse have already happened. And those are just the cases we know about. You can imagine there's definitely more out there that have not been reported, either to the department or to the news. And you don't need anything to hide. You need one bad plate read, one incorrect database entry, one officer who jumps to conclusions, one compromised account, or one person with legitimate access who decides to abuse it. Then there's the other argument I hear all the time. Your phone already tracks you. Yes, that is also a privacy problem. But I'm already being tracked is a terrible argument for creating even more surveillance. Your phone tracking you doesn't somehow make the government tracking harmless. There's an enormous difference between the two of those. Google, Apple, Verizon, Facebook, they can and do collect a disturbing amount of information, but they normally cannot pull you over. They cannot handcuff you. They cannot search your house. They cannot seize your property. They cannot prosecute you. But who can? The government. The government can. And at least with a phone, I do have some imperfect choices. I can leave it at home. I can turn it off. I can change the permissions on it, even though that probably won't get you very far. I can use another device that's not as tied to my identity. With Flock, I didn't install anything. I didn't agree to anything. I can't uninstall it. I can't leave it at home. I may not even know the cameras exist. And this isn't really a local camera system either. A town may tell its residents, well, we're going to put up a few cameras to find stolen cars. But these systems can be connected across departments and jurisdictions. In just one investigation of Flock search logs, even officers in a relatively small community were searching across thousands of cameras across a region. So the real question isn't, do we want 10 cameras in our town? It's, do we want our town participating in a much larger searchable surveillance network? And Flock isn't just selling basic plate cameras anymore. That's their main bread and butter, but the ecosystem is expanding into searchable video, investigative software, drones, 911 integrations, audio detection, and other sensors. And people go with that and say, well, it's still just for searching vehicles. Why do we see them on greenways? Why do we see them in parks? And excuse me, my cat is deciding to meow a bit in the background. So that's our little special guest. Miss Sylvia. It's okay. I know she's a little upset about these cameras as well. Let me finish up here. So they're just as good at tracking people. Officers have already been caught in logs searching for people based on color and height and the clothes they're wearing. And guess what? It can find those people. There's also more expansive tooling coming around the horizon that's already here. Add-ons that you can add to a Flock system or another type of automated license plate reader. Other companies are developing systems that can correlate Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, vehicle, and RFID signals with this data. So Leonardo specifically has Signal Trace. And think about what happens when those systems start connecting to your vehicle, your phone, your watch, other devices that repeatedly travel with you, the people whose devices repeatedly appear alongside yours. Your cat, literally your cat and your tire pressure sensors are signals that they advertise that they can track and associate with vehicles even without a license plate read. And at that point, we're not talking about reading license plates anymore. We're talking about building digital patterns of people's lives. And now, this is where I want to be fair. Flock absolutely can help solve crimes. Of course it can. It has. If police know what vehicle they're looking for, having cameras everywhere can generate useful evidence. But that's not the question. That's not the problem. The question is whether helping solve some individual crimes proves that mass deployment actually reduces crime enough to justify tracking everybody. Those are completely different claims. A camera generating a lead does not mean it prevented a crime. It does not mean that a crime would otherwise have gone unsolved. And it does not prove that covering a city in cameras caused the crime rate to fall. And the public safety money is finite. Our tax funds, some of the grants that come from our federal tax funds all that is finite. Every dollar spent on another surveillance camera is a dollar that could have gone toward another investigator, another officer, forensics, prosecutors, community policing. So if government wants an extraordinary new power, the ability to search the historical movements of millions of innocent people, then the burden should be on the government to demonstrate an extraordinary benefit. And finally, this is a big one for me. Forget whether you trust the people running this system today. That is irrelevant. Think of the president you have trusted the least. Think of the governor that you have trusted the least, the attorney general that you've trusted the least, the prosecutor, the police chief, your random police officer. Think of all those, not the best ones. Think of the ones that you've trusted the least. Now give them this system. Because civil liberties are not designed around the government you trust. They're designed around the government you don't. So during the next pandemic, war, terrorist attack, civil emergency, a political crisis, we can look back at COVID as a recent big example. The rules can change very quickly. How the government treats your freedoms, your liberties as an American, that can change very quickly and can be very hard to challenge that in a timely manner. But surveillance infrastructure built today doesn't disappear when the definition of person of interest or the definition of wrong or the definition of liberty changes tomorrow. And Flock isn't the only company doing this. Axon, Motorola, Rekor, Leonardo, others are building overlapping pieces of the same infrastructure. So replacing Flock with another vendor doesn't solve the underlying problem. You're going to hear many local governments saying, well, we don't use Flock, we use Motorola. That's not an answer to that. And the question is not whether cameras can help solve crime. They can. The question is whether the benefit justifies turning everyone's movements into a searchable historical database without individualized suspicion, without meaningful consent, and with almost no practical way to opt out. Because once that infrastructure exists, and it very well practically does, we're no longer debating whether to build a surveillance state. We're debating who gets the password.